Elon Musk has developed quite the reputation for lofty goals, splashy tech news, and stock market fluctuations. While all of his ventures are quite aspirational, it feels fair to say that his SpaceX Starship is the most extravagant of his endeavors. The SpaceX Starship aims to safely ferry 100 people at a time to Mars and remain completely reusable for subsequent flights. Space travel is certainly no easy task, and Musk is going big with his SpaceX Starship. Huge, really. The Starship is among the largest spacefaring vessels ever made, measuring a total of 120 meters tall and carrying a payload of 100,000 kilograms. But what exactly is inside this giant Starship? In this video, we'll take you inside the SpaceX Starship and get a closer look at the future of interplanetary travel. What makes up the SpaceX Starship? Before we go inside the Starship, it's important to understand the different parts of the craft. The Starship refers to the combined parts made up of the Super Heavy rockets and the cargo and crew carrying area, also referred to as the Starship. Basically, you have the rockets on the bottom half and the ship on the upper half when you're looking at the whole thing standing up. The Super Heavy rockets are SpaceX's own creation of unique rocket propellers. At the bottom of the rocket, there will be 28 Raptor engines. The number seems to continue to fluctuate, but at the time of writing, 28 seems to be the way to go. These engines have been carefully developed by the SpaceX team over the last decade. These 28 rockets will be supplied with 3,400 tons of cryogenic methalox and should be able to create approximately 16 million pounds of thrust. This makes the Super Heavy even more powerful than the immense Saturn V rocket that launched the NASA Apollo moon missions of the 1960s and 1970s. Above these massive thrusters, we reach the Starship part of the craft. After launch, this is the point at which separation would occur so that the rocket can be reused for additional launches. At the bottom of Starship, there are 6 more Raptor engines to continue guiding the craft through space after launch. These engines are highly efficient and carefully burn the fuel in a strategic series of stages to maximize the output. Musk and SpaceX have heavily emphasized efficiency at every turn in the project. Above these 6 Raptor engines, we have the fuel supply tanks. These 2 massive propellant tanks contain a supply of liquid methane and liquid oxygen. The liquid methane is considered to be the fuel and the oxygen is the oxidizer. When the two are combined, it's called methalox. This is not traditional rocket fuel and has struck some scientists as an unusual choice. Methane has proven to be an effective rocket fuel, though Musk has also said that methane could be synthesized from existing subsurface ice caps on Mars and from the atmosphere using a process called Sabatier reaction. The fact that methane can be synthesized on the Martian surface has made it a highly appealing fuel source for the project as it continues to feed the idea of efficiency. Above the 2 giant propellant tanks, we have what is called the upper stage or nose cone area of the spacecraft. This huge payload compartment is where cargo and people would be placed for the trip through the stars. While Musk has mused that you could fit 5 or 6 people per cabin if you really wanted to, he's also noted that 2 people per cabin is more realistic, resulting in about 100 people per trip. This payload area also features storage space, common gathering areas, and shelters designed to protect the crew from any nasty radioactive solar flares which may occur during the trip. The cabins more closely resemble walk-in closets based on renderings, but it's possible that over time these will grow and reshape to be more comfortable for the likely 9-month-long journey to Mars. What will that time be like on a trip to Mars? While the Starship is still undergoing several prototypes, Musk has set a timeline for the first civilian crew to be sent on a lunar orbit in 2024. Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa will join a crew of civilians for a week-long trip aboard the Starship. So what exactly will life be like for that week? And eventually for the 9-month trek to Mars? Rendering shows small personal cabins inside the nose cone designed to offer passengers private sleeping and cabin space for personal belongings. Other renderings depict classical music concerts and events. While they have a long way to go before they're quite there, it would seem that Musk wants the journey to resemble a cruise ship in some ways. Passengers could expect live entertainment, fine dining, and activities over the course of the trip to keep them engaged and occupied. Still, 9 months is a long time for a cruise, so it would be safe to assume that there would be plenty of downtime to commune in the common areas. Beyond these renderings and some little details, Musk has actually been somewhat tight-lipped about the human experience on the rocket. He has remained primarily focused on the spacecraft design and how it will successfully launch and fly. When asked about life support systems for the humans he intends to put on board, he said, "I don't think it's actually super hard to do that relative to the spacecraft itself. The life support system is pretty straightforward." But just how straightforward is it, really? After all, the life support system needs to be able to simulate everything humans need to survive on Earth. This includes the right atmosphere, or mixture of gas we are all so accustomed to breathing, which will involve filtering out appropriate amounts of carbon dioxide, but maintaining the right levels of oxygen. There's also the matter of drinking water, human waste disposal, and protection from dangerous radioactive solar storms. The International Space Station makes use of what is called regenerative life support systems. This is a contained system that recycles things in a closed loop to maintain long-term stays of human activity. Urine and sweat are recycled into drinking water, and using a process known as electrolysis, some of the water is split into oxygen to maintain the atmosphere. Musk has stated that the life support system on the Starship would be regenerative as well, but scientists have been quick to point out that life support systems add significant weight and take up considerable space, and that this should be a factor in Musk's current prototypes if he wants to keep his aggressive schedule on track. SpaceX has not demonstrated experience with regenerative life support systems as of yet. They have put the Crew Dragon spacecraft into orbit with a life support system, but this is not maintained by a regenerative system. It's maintained through a carefully pre-supplied system with a finite lifespan. Protective shielding from solar storms is another critical unknown. Previous space missions and moon missions have involved careful shielding against this radiation. The Starship does feature shielded common areas for the crew in the design, but the fact is that we haven't sent any astronauts to experience these things for quite this long, and we aren't sure how they'll be affected. The 9-month trek across the stars to Mars will certainly be an interesting and possibly uncomfortable ride if you're constantly having to rush down and brace for solar storms. Will humans be colonizing Mars soon? Like we've said before, Musk has very ambitious goals about sending folks to Mars and starting to colonize. He foresees 2 possible outcomes for humanity. We either experience some sort of extinction event on Earth, or we become a spacefaring species and ensure survival by distributing the population more broadly in the solar system. It is conceivable that we will be sending some crewed missions on the Starship in the next decade, but it is somewhat unlikely that we will be sending those crewed missions to Mars in the next decade. We just don't quite know enough about what it would be like to send hundreds of people to the Martian surface. Plus, some crew will need to go and establish habitable conditions first. Still, Musk has set lofty goals before and somehow manages to pull them off despite all kinds of doubts. Keep your eyes on the horizon for the next several years as more prototypes are launched, and eventually, when that first manned mission voyages to the moon and eventually beyond. Would you want to be among the first civilians to help colonize Mars? Or would you rather stay earthbound and monitor the efforts from home? If things keep on pace, it seems that in this lifetime, we will have an answer to that question.